Hello and welcome to Jolineknitsalot. This is my show about knitting and crafting and the things I get up to here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. How are you? It is now the season of gift knitting for me. Do you knit holiday gifts? Do you like to make things and give them away? I'm often actually asked, I was asked last night, and as a matter of fact, what I do with all the things that I knit. I don't really know. I mean, I do knit a lot. It says so in the title of this podcast. But what do I do with everything that I knit? I do give a lot of things away. I knit a lot of socks, and those socks sometimes are put in a gift pile, and sometimes are just put in a box. And when my daughters have sleepovers, or if they have friends over, or if they need a gift, they often will go to the sock box and grab a pair of socks. I do knit gifts, and I knit for myself a lot. And recently I have started to give things away. But the question often arises, do you sell your knitting? And I don't. Not because it doesn't seem like a good idea. Who wouldn't want to make money off of a craft that they love? But there's a couple of downsides to that, I think. One is, if I knit things to sell, does it become a business and does it take some of the enjoyment out of it? And number two, most crafters, I think, like to use the best quality tools and materials that they can. And I'm not sure that people who buy knitwear or ready-made knit things are willing to pay what we invest into our craft. So we invest money into materials that we use to make the things that we love. And we also invest a lot of time. And to be properly paid for the things that we make would, I think, raise prices perhaps beyond what people are willing to pay. What is your experience? Do you sell your knitting? And if you do, how do you make that profitable for yourself? I would love to know. I don't think that it's something that I want to get into necessarily. I don't think I didn't become a knitter to sell things, and I don't think I necessarily want to do it now. But occasionally I look through all the things that I have knit, and maybe sweaters that I've had for a long time, or shawls, and I think it might be nice to part with some of these things so that I can make room for the new things. So, I mean, if you've had shawls lying around that you've worn a lot and you've enjoyed, or maybe you knit them and you decided it wasn't for you, then what do you do with all those things that you have? Selling them seems like a great idea, but then again, how do you set prices for the things that you've created? I think it's a question that a lot of crafters struggle with, and it's not necessarily something that is a pressing matter for me right now, but it is something I think about from time to time, especially when I'm asked, do you sell the things you make? Because it's not necessarily a straightforward question, is it? Didn't think we'd be getting into deep philosophical and or financial issues right off the bat, but here you are, and welcome to Jolineknitsalot. I have a few finished things off my needles this week. But let's start with the biggest thing that you can see, and this is my Geo Gradient shawl. I'm going to pop a picture here so you can see the whole thing spread out. This was this year's Stephen West mystery shawl. And it was not without controversy. I think a lot of us know that at the beginning of this knit along, the first clue that Stephen produced, some people felt looked like a hate symbol. And so Stephen was quick, I think, to pivot. I mean, it did take him a couple of days to be sure, but he did pivot away from that design and encouraged knitters to either start with a more basic pattern that he had already sort of developed, or make their own squares to start off this shawl and then go from there. And I think that provided a lot of knitters with the confidence to just go ahead and do their own thing, which was great. I think that this year's shawl created a feeling of camaraderie because we were all coming together to share ideas on how to make this knit along work in a way that made people feel safe and heard. But I think it also gave people the license to follow their own heart and do what they wanted to do. And I've seen very creative versions of this shawl. I chose to be quite black and white and literal in my thinking, both in the color choices that I made and in following the clues. So I followed Stephen's clues along as he put them out. I didn't really change anything. And I'm really happy with the shawl that I made. So why don't I show you each clue in this finished piece. So the center square that you see here is garter stitch, and it started at the center and was worked out. This is the one that was the pivot for Stephen, and we all changed to sort of support him in his creative decision to move away from that first square. So this was just a plain square, and I had given some thought to doing some embroidery on it, but now I don't think I will. I think I'll just leave it the way it is. The second clue were some chevrons of eyelets, and you can see them moving out from the center square, and you don't have fluff on your shawl. So here's one side of clue 2 with these strips of alternating stockinette with eyelets and garter rib or garter stitch. So there's one on each side. Clue 3 was slip stitches, and so you can see that yarn was held in the front of the knitting to create an interesting texture pattern. And this, the thing I like about this section is that it is the slip stitches create a more dense fabric because the slip stitches on the front work a little bit like stranded knitting in that those strands keep the knitting from pulling too much. So it's slightly less flexible, but it also does create a more dense fabric. And so it's got some weight to it, which I really like on the ends of the shawl, because it means that the shawl will hang nicely and stays where you put it. And finally, the last clue, which was picked up all along the bottom edge of the shawl, was a dip stitch. So here, if I show it to you this way, maybe, where you picked up, you dipped your needle down into stitches rows below and pulled up strands that were a little bit like the stranded knitting, where the stranded knitting was worked horizontally, those strands. In the dip section, the dips are more vertical. And again, this edge section has got some more weight to it. And that means when you put the shawl on, this is how I put my shawl on. I usually start in the middle, tuck it around my neck, and then take the ends and wrap it around and then zhuzh it appropriately. So once I've got it around myself, I'll just move it around so that I can see some of those features in the shawl. And there we go. But these tails of the more weighty stitches, the slip stitches and those dip stitches, stay really nicely where you put them. And I really like that about this shawl. Equally, I put this shawl on the other day just hanging over my shoulders, and I'll pop a picture in here so you can see. And it really, the shape of the shawl stays very nicely on your shoulders if that's how you want to wear it. I'm really happy with this shawl. I enjoyed the knit along a lot. I, like many knitters at the beginning, was excited to get going, and when I heard that we were changing away from the work that we were doing, I was a little bit hesitant. Well, hesitant? It's hard to describe your feelings in something like that. I really wanted to keep what I had made because I was enjoying what I was doing, and I was enjoying that initial creative process. But I realized, I think, that I did not want to be wearing something that somebody else might find offensive, and I didn't want to contribute to that that feeling of hurt that can be caused by something that, even if you don't see it, somebody else might see it, and I didn't want to have that in something that I was making. So I did decide to pivot, and I'm glad that I did. And in the end, I'm quite happy that I chose very neutral colors. Can't tell if I've got a wrong side or a right side going on here. I'm really glad that I chose some neutral colors so that I can wear this shawl with a lot of things, especially with jackets. I have black jackets for winter as well as like a caramelly color one, and I think that this color palette will be quite wearable. This is my Geo Gradient shawl. I used Frankie Gray fibers, which is the fiber dyed by Jody of the Grocery Girls. I got a kit from her store right when she opened up, and it all was neutrals packaged up by her. So this is parchment. This next one is called Sand Dollar. This medium tone is called Taupe, and the darkest one is called Onyx. And I used less than a full skein of each, and that included the partial start of the one clue that I had done. In the end, I had the least amount of this Sand Dollar colorway left. I had about 8 grams, and that was I could have ripped out the initial beginning of the first clue that I had done, but I chose not to. I just left it, and I thought if I need that yarn, I will pull it out. But in the end, I didn't need it, and I had 8 grams left of that one, and then more of each of the other colors. But this isn't the only thing I have of my needles this week. It's been kind of a busy week. I have finished a pair of DRK everyday socks for my husband for Christmas. Don't tell him. Now these socks are nearly impossible to show unless they're on a sock blocker. And the sock blockers I have are too small for these socks. So please humor me as I try to show you a pair of socks on a sock blocker that is too small. All right, we're just gonna have to accept the fact that the toe is gonna hang off the end. Here is the finished pair of socks. And in this marl yarn, it's difficult to see, but the DRK Everyday Sock is a ribbed sock. It's knit from the toe up and incorporates a fleegle heel. And I chose some very traditional colors to make my husband a pair of work socks. The yarn I used was Leo and Roxy, which is a dyer out of Ontario, Canada. They have this lovely marled yarn base, which is actually really soft and stretchy. So I hope these socks fit him, and I also hope he likes them. The white I used was my standard West Yorkshire Spinners in the Milk Bottle colorway, which I've been using a lot lately. And then a stripe of some red yarn that I have from Polka Dot Creek yarns called Strawberry. In fact, I'm wearing a pair of socks very similar to these. Let's see how flexible I can be. Nope. Ta-da! These ones have a teal stripe. Oh, that was not easy. Let's try this foot. Ta-da! The pattern that I used for my work socks are a little bit different. They're not the toe-up socks by Andrea Mowry. They're a top-down with a heel flap and gusset, but they are ribbed, and I do enjoy how they fit on my foot. So I'm hoping that he likes a ribbed sock too. And if he doesn't, then I'll never knit him another pair of these socks ever again. This is the DRK Everyday Sock by Andrea Mowry, and that is a gift off the needles. I finished another pair of socks. This was sort of a pair that I started on a whim, and I talked to you about them last time. They're the Little Dots socks by Summerlee Designs, and I've talked about her before, but I'm a big fan of Summerlee's sock designs. She has some very, very whimsical, often colorwork patterns, and I really enjoyed them. So these were the socks that I was working on. I had some pink toes, and then I asked you what color I should use for heel, and I went with the blue heel that a lot of people recommended. So these socks are knit from the top down with an afterthought heel. They are stranded colorwork, so let me show you the inside of one of these socks so you get a sense of what it was like to knit them. So these are my strands, which actually I think they look pretty good. We just carried the yarn up from row to row, so we didn't have to cut the yarn every time we did a row of dots, which was really nice. And in the pattern, she gives you some options on how to make these your own. One way is to, instead of having the dots offset like this, like this, you could stack the dots on top of each other and have more of a grid pattern, which would be very cute too. I made some not too tall socks, I would say. I just did 3 rows of dots before I popped in the heel, but you could for sure make these as long or short as you want. Some people I saw just did dots on the ankle and then left the body of the sock, or the foot of the sock, I guess, plain. And you could do that yourself if you liked. There was a little dots knit along, which sort of inspired me to join along. This was a knit along for October, and a lot of people made some really, really creative little dots socks. I especially like the ones where people used some variegated yarn for the dots and then a more solid for the background. I think those ones looked really great. So yeah, another pair of socks. These ones would probably be for me. I really like how thick and dense these socks are. Here, let me just pop one on the sock blocker. Because you're knitting stranded color work for these socks, you do effectively get a double thickness of fabric. So you do have to be a little bit careful to make sure that you are leaving the strands in the back loose enough so that these socks will get on over your foot. But if you do that, then you get a rather thick and warm fabric that I think will be really nice this winter and super colorful. And it's hard to tell on this camera, but my black dots are a sparkle base that I got from Knit Picks a long time ago. So that is another thing off my needles. The last thing off my needles was something it was sort of, I guess, play, if you can call it that. I've been at my local yarn store, the Fiber Nook. I teach classes there, and I do organize classes for knitting and crochet and other crafts. So if you are local to Edmonton and there's classes you'd like to hear about, please let me know, because I would love to hear your input. While I was at Fiber Nook, I was looking at some of the yarns they have in stock. One of them is called Manchlopi. Manchlopi is a unspun yarn from Spain, I believe, and it's really interesting. Let me show you a small bit of this yarn. So this is what it looks like as a small portion of the plate that you would get. A plate of this yarn is like sort of this big around. It's quite large, but it is about the same weight and yardage as a DK yarn. When you look at it, it's not what you would expect. The yarn is a 2-ply, and these are the 2 plies. You can knit it as a 1-ply like this, and that would be considered a fingering weight. And then held double, it is considered a DK weight. And I was quite curious about this yarn because I wasn't sure exactly how it would knit up. So when I was talking to one of the yarn owners, she asked if I would consider knitting up a store sample so that other people could also see what it looked like knit up. So I took some home. Here's what I have left. And I knit up a barley hat. But the barley hat is a pattern by Tin Can Knits. It's a free hat. It's one of their fabulous patterns that goes from a very small person to a rather larger person. And I knit up an adult size barley hat. So let me show you what it looks like knit up. I was really pleasantly surprised at the sort of stitch definition that you get. So if you have a look at this garter stitch, I feel like that's pretty good stitch definition for yarn that has no definition at all. I knit it to a DK gauge. So this pattern, or this sample that I made, gets about 5 stitches per inch. So that's about DK, or like a light worsted. And it is a really thick and dense fabric. This yarn, like knit up, it gives you sort of a rustic feel. It's a little bit like a woolen spun yarn, something like a Brooklyn tweed shelter, all knit up. It's got that same feel, and I think warmth. It is quite a dense fabric when knitted this gauge. I mean, you could certainly knit this looser, but I think this would be a really nice and warm yarn to use for a sweater. I did knit this at a tighter gauge than I think I would like for a sweater because it is quite dense, and I think I'd like something with a little bit more drape. But for a hat, I think this would be quite warm. The really interesting thing about this yarn is that because it is not spun and it is so unrefined, I would say, you can just pull it apart. So it doesn't even take that much effort to pull this yarn apart. So while you're knitting it, you do have to be a little bit careful that you're not pulling on your yarn so much that it pulls the yarn apart. But in order to put your yarn back together, you can just rub it like a spit splice without the spit, and it just goes back together. And you can go ahead and knit that. So this yarn has intrigued me. I'm actually considering knitting a sweater out of something like this because I think that with all of that air in this unspun yarn, it would be very, very warm. That's the thing with woolen spun yarns versus worsted spun yarns, is that they trap so much air that they would keep you warmer than a worsted spun, which is more smooth and perhaps shiny looking. But what you get for smooth and shiny, you sacrifice in terms of warmth. So this is the barley hat that I knit. It used much less than one skein of this manchlopi. And I think I might be interested in knitting a sweater out of this yarn now that I've had a chance to try it. And if you're interested in checking this hat out, you can go and find it at the Fiber Nook. So I said this was a shop sample, which means that this hat, like the Harlow hat that I knit last time, are something that a yarn store gave me yarn to knit. In exchange, I knit them a hat, and then I will get something in return. So some people knit samples for free. That's your choice. Some yarn stores or yarn suppliers will pay with a gift card. For example, not too long ago, I knit a couple of hats for Frankie K Fibers, and she gave me a gift card, which in turn I used to purchase the yarn for this shawl. At Fiber Nook, they, as with a lot of places, will pay you by the meter, I believe. So whatever it is that you've knit, however many meters you used of the yarn, they will pay you by the meter. And I think that is a sort of a standard way of paying sample knitters. Sample knitters can be used for shops or yarn dyers so that there is a product that they can show off at their shop or at yarn festivals. It may also be something that pattern designers use for making samples of their designs quickly. So if a sample knitter, or if a pattern designer does not have the time to knit maybe more than one version of their pattern, or if they don't have enough time to knit each size, they could hire a sample knitter to knit them that size or that pattern, and in turn they will pay them. That is not the same as a test knitter. A test knitter is someone who volunteers to knit a pattern and let the pattern designer know if there was any issues or problems with that pattern. And then in return, they get the finished version of that pattern. So slightly sample knitting and pattern testing are slightly different. So this pattern or sample will be at Fiber Nook, and I'm going to be dropping that off this weekend. And that is all the finished objects I have off my needle. Currently, I have a couple of things on my needles. One of them won't last long. My daughter had a long night of volleyball last night, and so I picked up my November sock tubes, and I actually managed to finish one sock. So the tube is by Mustache Yarns. This is the Ray colorway, which is a colorway based on Star Wars. I used the taupe color from my shawl to knit a cuff and a toe and an afterthought heel. And let me tell you, this was tricky to do when I was in a busy gym watching volleyball. So I got one sock completely done last night, and I started the second one, and I have done, oh, I'm a little bit tangled. I have done most of the toe, I would say. It's amazing how much knitting you can get done when you're watching a very tense game and you're nervous, like I was. And yeah, I'm really happy. These November sock tubes, again, will fly off my needles. I just have to do a little bit more of the toe, a heel, and the cuff. And then these will likely go just in my sock basket for whatever occasion arises. And I have one more project that I just started the other day. You may remember I had been I had been crocheting some granny squares, and that got me interested in other crochet projects. There's a pattern out called Grannies in a Row, which I'll pop a picture here, or here, of a pair of socks that incorporates a round of granny squares. So the other day I found some yarn that I wanted to use to make these socks, and I got started on the granny squares. Now I realized when I was almost done all of the squares that I had made a mistake in the squares, but I'm going to leave them and I'll show you what the mistake, I'll let you know what the mistake was, and I'm going to go ahead and use them anyway. So the yarn that I want to use for the self-striping, these self-striping socks, is a West Yorkshire Spinners holiday colorway. It's got a bit of sparkle to it, and this is called Fairy Lights. Now, if you have a look at the yarn, it's got some green, solid green bits, and then bits of blue and white, red and white, and then pink and white. So I used those colors as inspirations for my little granny squares, and I made the two cuffs that go around the sock that I will then pick up stitches from to knit the rest of the sock. So here's one of those. I've done two exactly the same, as you can see. So I picked up the blue, the pink, and the red, and I made these 6 little granny squares for each sock. I made them in a round. I did crochet join as you go to connect them, which I think gives them a bit of an airy and lacy appearance, but also contributes to the amount of stretch that these have. So I'm very confident that these will not be too tight for my ankle, which was one thing I was a little worried about. Now let me show you where I goofed up. In this pattern for a granny square, you were only supposed to do 1 chain in between these clusters, which I think is pretty standard, and I knew that, but for some reason I had it in my head that I did 3 chains. So I did in fact do 3 chains, and you can see here at the top and bottom of these granny squares, they're a little bit lacier or more open than probably they should be. But you know what? I'm calling it a design feature and I'm going with it. So these are the 2 little cuffs that I have done, and I'll be picking up some stitches and working my way down and up to create a pair of socks. I wanted to get these done because I'm going on a trip soon. My family and I are getting away for the fall break that we have at school, and we are going to New York City. I'm very excited, and so are my daughters. We are going to be spending, I think, a total of 6 days away from home. And I would love to know in the comments below if you have some favorite places you like to go in New York City. We do have some ideas. We will be hitting up some of the usual suspects. I want to go to the Empire State Building. We'll probably go take a peek at the Statue of Liberty. We're going to check out Rockefeller Center because I have it on good authority that their Christmas tree has just been delivered. And yeah, we want to do some shopping. We want to see some shows. So if you have some favorite sites or places to go, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts. But because we're heading away for a few days, and it is a bit of a trek from Edmonton to New York, I have some plain knitting to consider. So I'm going to be taking these granny square socks, which I think are going to be really fun because once I pick up the stitches, it's just going to be like knitting a plain sock. So I'm going to be taking those socks, and then I also am going to be working on some sherbet bandanas. Sherbet bananas? No, sherbet bandanas. I have leftovers from the Wavy Gravy shawl that I made. Here, let me get all my colors out. These are my leftovers. And I'd like to use these little bits to make some fun, colorful sherbet bandanas. Now, I'm not exactly sure which colors I'm going to be putting together. I would like those two together. Pink and black, maybe. I also have a full skein of a neutral color, which, oh, aren't those two pretty together? So I'm going to be trying to come up with some colorful combinations to try and use up all of these odds and ends to make up a few sherbet bandanas for Christmas gifts. And so the Christmas knitting has begun. I've got some socks off the needles. I've got some plans for some little scarves. Let me know what you plan on knitting for the holidays, if you do plan on knitting. Maybe you don't, and that's totally fine. Also, please let me know if you have some favorite yarn stores that you think I should visit in the New York area, keeping in mind that I'm going to be having some teenagers with me, and if they're close to bakeries and or coffee shops, that would be super helpful. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that in the next couple of weeks you get some time to visit a coffee shop or a bakery and do the things you like to do. I know I plan on knitting a lot. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.